All right, well, it is great to see everybody for week 2 of our series, Sticky Notes, where we are talking about some great things to remember, some great reminders when it comes to our faith and our walk with God. As we get started today, I'll take you back last summer. Last summer, my wife Ashley and I had a day that was one of those days that had the potential to be like a no good, very bad, awful day. You know what I'm talking about? For us, the day I'm thinking of was the day that our oldest son turned 16 and got his driver's license. Now, you should know, Beckham's a great kid, and he gave me permission to talk about him this morning. So he didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I think he would be okay with this. Beckham got his license last year, and, we're kind of nervous about that. He's a 16-year-old male, and 16-year-old males don't have the highest insurance rates in the nation for no reason. That's a position and a title they have earned, apparently. So I was a little bit concerned about this. And my son is incredibly bold and confident. He is not timid at all. So I had never, in all of our practice driving hours, I never had one of those conversations that I've heard other parents have had with their more timid teenagers, where you've had to say okay, now when you pull out into traffic, you got to accelerate a little faster because you've got this line of cars that's always waiting on you. No, my conversations were more like, whoa, I didn't know the minivan could accelerate like that. Wow. Just learned something, So that's him. He's bold. He also has ADHD, which means his attention span is about as big as the Chicago Bears' chances of winning the Super Bowl this year. Meaning very small. For those of you who don't watch sports, his attention span is very small. And not only that, COVID rules were still in effect, so he did not have to take a driver's test. What? If you didn't know they were doing this during COVID, now you can be terrified like the rest of us that for a couple of years, they did not make 16-year-olds take the driver's part of the test. They took the book exam, but then they just gave them their license. And so when my son turned 16 and got his license, needless to say, my wife and I were worried. We were worried about him, we care about this kid. We love him. He's a great kid. This is my oldest born son. This is my heir. This is my progeny. He's going to carry on my family name, right? So I didn't want anything to happen to him. I didn't want him to do anything that hurt anybody else. I didn't want there to be any property damage because that gets expensive. And so needless to say, the day that he turned 16 and printed his license off the internet, Father help us all, I did not hand him the keys just in full faith, confident, at peace as he drove away for the first time. No, there was some anxiety there. I wanted to be a fly in the car with him because I wanted to see for myself how he would drive when I wasn't sitting in the passenger seat. Right? I wanted to know how fast he was driving. I wanted to know where he was driving. I wanted to know who was in the car with him. I wanted to know that he came to a complete and final stop at stop signs. He didn't just roll through them because they have a white border like somebody told him one time, right? So there was some anxiety there. Now, the problem, of course, is that we can't see. When our teenagers drive away, we cannot see them. So the closest that we found to come to this was we downloaded this app. And if you have a teenage driver, you probably have the app. There's this app you can download on your kids' phones. And we told him it was there, so he knew. But this app was literally our eyes in the car with him. Because of this app, we could see at any time exactly where he was, exactly where he was driving, exactly how fast he was going. We could see him come to a complete and final stop. We knew where he had been and how long he had stayed. We love this app. This app is fantastic. Because we just didn't have peace without seeing for ourselves. And that's really not that crazy, right? If you have teenage drivers, I'm sure you felt that same tension that we felt. And really, this is true for any arena of life. When you don't get to see with your own two eyes, it is much harder to trust, is it not? Yeah, this is why we have the phrase in our culture that we've all said at one point or another, where we say, I'll believe it when I what? Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. And this is a normal part of our culture. This is a normal part of the human experience. We think, I'll believe it when I see it for myself. I'll believe it when I can see it with my own two eyes. I'll believe it when I see the evidence in front of me and I don't actually have to have faith. I'll believe it when I see it. This perspective or this feeling impacts not only our relationships with one another, but it also impacts our relationship with God. This has some play when it comes to our level of trust in God. Think about your own life. Has there ever been an experience or a situation that you faced where you wondered where God was in it? Have you ever had a situation where you wondered, like, is God doing anything about this for me? Have you ever had a situation where it did not look like God was aware of what was going on because you felt like surely if God was in control and if God was aware, he would have stepped in by now to do something, but I don't see God at work. God, what are you doing? Maybe some of you feel that way this morning. You feel the level of anxiety that comes with not seeing exactly what God is doing. You feel the anxiety of not being sure exactly what God is up to, if he is aware, if he cares, if he's going to intervene, if he's maybe just set the world in motion and now he's sitting back to just watch it like go about its business. Well, it's important to understand, it's important to remember that just because we cannot always see what he is doing, that does not mean that God is not always active. And the story that I want us to unpack together this morning illustrates this truth in a profound way. It comes to us from the book of 2 Kings, way back towards the beginning of the Old Testament. And the book of 2 Kings records a lot of the nation of Israel's history. If you love history like I do, you should read the books of 1 and 2 Kings. Well, by the time we get into 2 Kings, the nation of Israel has had a bit of a civil war. They have fractured the nation into two different empires. There was the southern kingdom that took the name Judah. So it was the southern kingdom of Judah. And the southern kingdom of Judah had its capital in the city of Jerusalem. The northern kingdom kept the name Israel. So you had the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. And the northern kingdom had its capital in the city of Samaria. Well, at this time, the northern kingdom of Israel has a king, but there's a much more important figure on the scene, and it's the prophet Elisha. Maybe you've heard the name Elisha before, and this is where it comes from. Elisha was a prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel during this time, and he was a great man of God. God had chosen him, God had anointed him, God had equipped him. God would speak to Elisha, and he would speak through Elisha to the people. Through Elisha, God did some unbelievable miracles. And we're going to see one when we jump into the story in chapter 6 of 2 Kings today. Now, just a little bit more background before we get into our passage. When we pick up the story in 2 Kings chapter 6, we find that the northern kingdom of Israel is at war with this opposing people group, this neighboring people group, the Arameans. And the Arameans are raiding the villages in the northern kingdom of Israel. But what keeps happening is every time the king of Aram moves his military or he starts another raid, it gets to the point where it looks like the northern kingdom is ready for them. Because God is actually telling Elisha where they're going to go and what their next move will be. This is how God was protecting the northern kingdom of Israel. And so this is where we pick up the scene. This is where we pick up the story. 2 Kings chapter 6, we're going to just read the entire story, like 12 verses through. I'm going to pause after each verse and just make some observations about what must have been happening for them, and then some application for how that impacts us today. All right, picking up the story, verse 11. We read that every time the Israelites, saw them coming, this enraged the king of Aram. And so he summoned his officers and demanded of them, "Tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel?" He wanted to know who's the mole, who's the traitor. Clearly, we have a spy in our midst because every time I try to set up for another raid, they know I'm coming. "None of us, my lord the king," said one of his officers, "but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom." They're like, nobody's a traitor. Like, don't kill any of us. Nobody's telling them. There is no spy. Like what's going on is that they have this prophet named Elisha, and their God is telling this prophet, and this prophet tells their king, and so they get ready for us. That's what's going on, king. "Go, Find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men to capture him. This king is like, I got to get rid of this prophet. You figure out where he is, and we're going to go get him. The report came back. He is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night, and they surrounded the city. So they figure out that Elisha's in Dothan. Dothan was a small village, roughly about 10 miles north of the capital of Samaria. And so this king discovers that he's living in Dothan, and so he sends his best soldiers. I imagine this is like their version of SEAL Team 6, right? And they're well-equipped. Like they've got horses and chariots. They're like loaded up and ready for battle. And they go in the middle of the night, and they surround this tiny village of Dothan. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my Lord, what do we do?" the servant asked. So Elisha's servant wakes up early in the morning, and he steps outside, and he sees this foreign army has surrounded their little village, and he panics. He freaks out, rightfully so, because he knows we have no way out. I cannot see how this could possibly end well for us. There is no military in this village. We are not loaded up and ready for war. We have no weapons, and we're not fighters. We're not soldiers. Now, Elisha's servant apparently had a little more loyalty to Elisha than some of us would have, because some of us might be like, "Ooh, they're not here for me. They're here for you, Elisha. So go get them, bud. Man, I'm going to be here while you go talk to them and cheering you on. I'll pray for you. But you go out there and you see what they want, and I'll just wait back here," right? No, Elisha's servant doesn't do that. He knows if they're here for Elisha, they're here for me. If they take down Elisha, they're taking down me. If there's no way out for Elisha, there's no way out for me either. And so he is justifiably terrified. We read, "Don't be afraid," Elisha tells his servant. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Elisha tries to reassure his servant. He tries to encourage him. He says, hey, just don't be afraid. Elisha's servant had to be going, "Bro, what are you talking about? Don't be afraid. How could I not be afraid? Look around, Elisha. We are surrounded. We have no way out. I cannot see how this could possibly end well for us. And what is this? Those who are with us are more than those who are against us? What are you talking about, Elisha? Again, look around. That's not true. Those who are with them are far more than those who are with us." This is those moments that you have when you face a situation where you cannot see how it could possibly work out, and somebody says, "Hey, it'll be okay. Hey, I'm sure it's going to all work out in the end." Where somebody tries to encourage you, but it feels almost patronizing because you have eyes, you have a brain, and you know this situation is not possibly going to end well. I can't see any solution to this where I come out the other side unscathed. We have all been there, where we feel anxious about the situation we're facing, and somebody else goes, "Hey, it's going to be all right." Well, this is Elisha and his servant. Elisha's servant is terrified because he knows we are going to die today. But this is the turning point in the story because Elisha prays. And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Open his eyes, Lord, so he may see. Apparently, Elisha could see something his servant couldn't see. And so he prays over his servant, and he prays, "Lord, open his eyes and let him see." Verse 17 says, "Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha." God opened the servant's eyes, and what did he see? He saw standing between him and Elisha, standing between the village and the opposing army, there's another army. There's another army surrounding Elisha and me and the villagers. There's an army, and they're loaded up with horses and chariots. You can picture it. They're just wearing heavenly body armor. They've got their own weapons, and they're literally blazing with fire. The foreign soldiers are going to have to come through them if they want to get to Elisha. Come on, let's go. Right? This is a movie I would pay to see. Boys, get in the truck. We're going to go see Elisha and the army of angels, right? Kirk Cameron. Where's Kirk Cameron when you need him? Like, this is a perfect story, bro. Well, the foreign army does not see the angel army. They can't see them. And so what they think, well, this is going to be a breeze. We're just going to march into this village. We're going to take this prophet Elisha. We're going to head back home. And so they move towards them. They start to move towards the village. But we read, as the enemy came down toward them, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Can you imagine? Just as they're getting close, all of a sudden, they all go blind, right? Not just like one or two of them, all of them. They're all had to be freaking out now. Now it's their turn to panic because they can't see what is going on. They don't know why they lost their vision. They don't know what's happening. They don't know where they are. They can't see. They don't know what to do. And so we read, Elisha goes out to talk to them. And Elisha told them, this is not the road and this is not the city. Follow me and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. And he led them to Samaria. Elisha had to be enjoying this. Notice that he doesn't actually lie to them. He just goes out to them, and after he gets them to calm down, I'm sure he had to take a second, like, hey, guys, everybody relax. Everybody just be quiet for a second. Hey, listen, I know who you're here for, but listen, you're in the wrong city. You've taken the wrong road. But if you follow the sound of my voice, I will lead you to the man that you're looking for. Just follow me for a little while longer. Just follow the sound of my voice. And so they do. So they follow Elisha, and he leads them all the way into Samaria, where the northern kingdom of Israel's army was. And once he gets them inside the city gates, we read that after they entered the city, verse 20, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were inside Samaria. Uh-oh. Oh, how the tables turn. Right? Their eyes are open. They're given the ability to see. Thank goodness. I'm sure they were happy the blindness was gone. But when their eyes are open, they realize exactly where they were and exactly what this means. And they know we're done. Like, we were going to take Elisha, but now we've been taken. Like, we are good as gone. They cannot see any way for them to get out of this alive, which the king of Israel probably didn't help the situation any, because he turns to Elisha and he says, when the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? First of all, the king seems a little too excited to kill them, doesn't he? Right? But you can kind of understand it because these men have been raiding their villages. They've been plundering their villages. They've been attacking them. They've taken lives. I'm sure both sides have lost lives. And so he thinks, I can just kill their army right now and get it over with. But of course, Elisha is like, no, don't kill them. Don't kill them all. Elisha says, do not kill them. Do not kill them, he answered. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink, and then go back to their master. And he's like, bro, like, you cannot kill a POW. Even today, killing a prisoner of war is a serious international war crime. So he says, don't kill them, feed them, and let them go back home. So the king prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. And here it is. Here's the end result of this entire event. Verse 23, so the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. God used this miraculous event to end the raids from the Arameans. Peace was restored to the kingdom of Israel, and not a single drop of blood was shed. And no doubt, Elisha's servant learned a valuable lesson that day that I'm sure he never forgot. And the lesson of this story is this: God is always at work, even when we can't see how. God is always at work, even when we can't see how. I have to imagine that there was no way Elisha's servant ever forgot about this day. Can you imagine that for the rest of his life, he probably never forgot the pit that he felt in his stomach when he stepped outside of his tent that morning, or the place where he was sleeping that morning, and he looked around and he saw the army of their enemies surrounding the village, knowing that they were isolated alone, that they were weaponless, that there was no military there. The feeling he must have felt when he could not see any way out must have been just all-encompassing. But then, can you imagine the feeling he felt when Elisha prayed, open his eyes and let him see? And his eyes were opened, and he saw the army of angels surrounding them, the army of angels on post, on guard between him and Elisha and this foreign army. Can you imagine how he must have felt when he saw God strike his enemies with blindness? And then they followed like sheep into the city of Samaria, where they were suddenly surrounded. And then God restored their ability to see. And then they all broke out like the fine china for Thanksgiving dinner, and like the peace was restored to the kingdom. What? Like he must have never forgotten this day. I have to imagine he lived the rest of his life with an overarching confidence that comes from knowing God is always at work, even when we can't see how. And that's the lesson, that's the reminder, that's the statement I want you to take with you into your own life this morning. A reminder that God is always at work, even when we can't see how. I think one of God's great desires for you is that you would live with the confidence that comes from knowing that He is always at work, even when you can't see how He's at work. That you would live with a confidence that comes from knowing that God is never idle. He never sits on the sidelines. He never taps out. He never sleeps or slumbers. He never needs a break or a rest. He never takes a day off. He never gets distracted. He never gets caught off guard or surprised. He never ignores you. He will never leave you or forsake you. In fact, it's just the exact opposite. God is always moving, always working, always watching, always aware. He is always sovereign and always in control over every situation. He is always good. He will always love you, and He will always care about the situation that you are facing. He will always care about the situation that is causing you to feel so much anxiety. And so He wants you to live remembering that God is always at work, even when you can't see how. And of course, we would all love to see physically what God is doing. We would all love to have an app that we could open that would show us exactly where God is and how long He's been there and what He's doing. And unlike our teenage drivers, we would all like to see Him speed up rather than slow down. Our preference would always be to see what God is doing physically, tangibly, in concrete ways in front of us, but most of the time, that is not how God works. Most of what God does will be invisible to us. But just because it's invisible to us does not mean that He is not actively working. It does not mean that He is not fully engaged. In fact, I would point out this morning that the way that God is engaged in our situations and the way that God is involved in your life could look 100 different ways depending on the situation. There is no limit to the way that God could be working in invisible ways in your life. Just a few that come to mind for me immediately that I have seen so many times in people's lives. Number one, maybe the first thing that God might be doing is that God might be preparing you. I have to believe that in this story, one of the things that God was doing was He was preparing Elisha's servant for where He was going to lead him in the future and how He wanted to use him in Elisha's ministry in the future. And so God used this event to increase the servant's faith. He used this event to teach him a valuable lesson about God's power and God's ability to rescue us. And God will do the same thing in your life. When you face a situation that at first you cannot possibly see any way through, He will use those circumstances and those occasions to grow your faith, to stretch you and to mold you, to shape you, to use the big church word, to sanctify you. To sanctify you simply means that God will continually work to purify you more and more into the image of Jesus, more and more into the image of the person that he sees when he looks at you, the person that you have been created to be. God loves you too much to leave you the way that you are today because he sees your full potential, and he is going to continually put you in environments where he gets to stretch you and mold you and shape you into a better version of yourself. Because no matter who you are and no matter how young or how old you are not done. God is not done using you. And God wants to use you in ever increasing ways over the course of your life as you walk with him and as he grows you and you become more and more like his son, Jesus. And so your best days are not behind you. It does not matter how old you are. Your best days are in front of you because God's not done shaping you and God's not done using you. So one of the things that God does in our lives through these situations is he uses them to prepare us for what he's going to invite us into in the future. Because we're just not ready today to do what he wants us to do tomorrow. And so he's got to bring us through these situations. That might be what God's doing. He might be preparing you. He might be aligning the world. In the story, ultimately, one of the things that God wanted to do was he wanted to end the raids from the Arameans. It's so interesting, though, isn't it, that while God had the power of an angel army, God brought about the solution by not really with any war at all. He really did it through hospitality. He aligned things in a way that hospitality was the solution. Now, I don't know, this is a total side note, but is it possible that when you face a situation where you can't see any way out and it feels like you are surrounded by your enemy and they have you right where they want you, is it possible that the solution that God wants to bring will be brought about not through your fighting, but through your hospitality and your love for your enemy? I don't know. It's just a thought. But in this story, God wanted to end the raids without fighting. But in order to do that, he needed to get them to sit down and break bread together. And how's he going to do that, right? I mean, neither side is just going to be like, hey, what are you doing for brunch on Sunday? Do you want to come by? You want to swing by the village? No, neither side was willing to do this. But God aligned everybody in just the perfect way to fulfill his purposes. He brought the opposing army to the village of Dothan, right? They didn't know why they were there. Now, they thought they knew why they were there. They thought they were there to collect Elisha and to take him back so they could end this, lopsided opposing force. That's not why they were there. They were there because God brought them there. God moved them into position. This is why Elisha and his servant were in Dothan. This is why God caused the blindness, and they were led into the city of Samaria, surrounded by the northern kingdom's army. God aligned everyone in just the perfect way so that he could bring about his purposes, and he ended the fighting peacefully. And in our lives, God is always working, and sometimes what he is doing is he is aligning everybody to just the right spot because he is about to fulfill his own purposes. We see this in our workplaces. And you wonder, why didn't I get that promotion? I was next up. I was next in line. I was the most qualified, but I got overlooked. I got passed over. What is going on, God? What are you doing? Why aren't you intervening? I can't see you doing anything, but God, but what's going on? And it's possible that what God is doing is God is aligning your workplace. He is aligning you for exactly where he wants you to fulfill his purposes in your life and through your life. We see this in school, in students. You might feel like, man, why did I get stuck in this teacher's class? It's possible that God is aligning your school because of what he is going to do. Teachers, you feel the same way. God, why did I get this student in my class, right? Like, it's even harder for me. Well, it's possible that God is aligning your classroom because God has plans and purposes, and he wants everybody to be aligned just right. And this is true for everything in our world. This is true, just to go all the way, this is true for the dating app that you're on, right? God needs to get the right person on the right app at the right time because he is aligning your dating scene just right because he has plans for your future family. God will work to change you and to prepare you. God will work in invisible ways to align the world. And the third thing that came to mind for me right away was that God sometimes is just setting the stage for a miracle. The morning that Elisha and his servant woke up and saw the foreign army, the stage had been set. And once the stage had been set perfectly, God got to display his limitless power. He got to display his power in the army of angels surrounding Elisha. He got to display his power when he opened Elisha's servant's eyes and he got to see what God was doing. His power was on display when he blinded the foreign army. His power was on display when he restored their sight. His power was on display when he ended the fighting between them peacefully. God's power was on display at every turn in this story. And sometimes it's the same thing in our lives. That God is just setting the stage for a work of his that we will not be tempted to then take credit for. Sometimes God allows the deck to get stacked against us so severely that when he brings about the solution, we're not tempted to take credit for it. We're not tempted to go, man, I made some good calls there. You know, I worked really hard and I brought about the solution and now I'm enjoying the benefits of it. Look how it all turned out because of me. No, sometimes God lets the deck get stacked a little bit stronger than you feel like you have on your own because he's setting the stage for a miracle that will change you, that will display his glory and his limitless power. Sometimes God is using these situations that are terrifying to us because of what we see. Sometimes he uses them to prepare us for the future. Sometimes he's aligning the world for what he wants to do. Sometimes he's I just blanked on the third one, setting the stage for a miracle. But it could also be a million other things. Ultimately, it can be slightly dangerous sometimes to ascribe God's purposes to his actions because his ways are higher than our ways. His perspective is different than our perspective. Sometimes our goals for our life are not the same as his goals for our life. So we have to be careful when we assign purposes to what God is doing and what God is allowing. But make no mistake, God is always at work, even when you can't see how. And I think for all of us, one of the things that God wants to do is he wants to open our eyes. He wants to give us the ability to see. The ability to see spiritually, not physically. Notice in this story that the miracle, the first miracle, when he opens the servant's eyes, that was not a physical showing of the army of angels. Right? The army of angels did not come to physical stature where everybody could see them. Otherwise, the other villagers would have seen them, and the opposing army would have seen them, and they would have probably turned around and run. I mean, if you see a magical army of angels come out of nowhere, blazing with fire, I don't think you'd hang around to fight them, would you? Right? No, they would leave. So God didn't make the miracle physical. It wasn't a physical visibility. But he gave his servant eyes to see beyond what was concrete. He gave him eyes to see beyond the here and now. He gave him eyes to see what was on the surface. He gave him eyes to see spiritually what was happening. And spiritually, there was an army of angels protecting them. This is what the Apostle Paul prays for followers of Jesus to experience in the first chapter of the book of Ephesians. In Ephesians, he prays this. He says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be opened so that you may know. And then he lists three things, and I even numbered them for you to make it easier to follow. He said, I pray that your eyes would be opened so that you would know three things. Number one, the hope to which you have been called. Number two, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people. And number three, his incomparably great power for us who believe. This is what the Apostle Paul was praying. that all of us as followers of Jesus would have our eyes opened so that we could see exactly what we need to see, so that we would know the hope to which we have been called, the glorious riches of our inheritance, and God's limitless power, and that we would live with that in mind. And so in your own life, when you find yourself faced with a situation that feels scary and intimidating, and you just don't see how this could be good, I want to invite you to pray the prayer of Elisha. Lord, open my eyes and let me see. Lord, open my eyes and let me see. This is the prayer that I want to invite you to start praying. Lord, open my eyes and let me see. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Let me see how you're at work in my circumstances and in this situation. Let me see how you're working and changing me through these circumstances, how you're growing me and refining me. Lord, help me to see how you align things and people just right to fulfill your purposes. Lord, help me see how you might be setting the stage to do something that displays your glory. Lord, help me to have eyes to see so that I can trust you when the situation doesn't make sense. Lord, give me eyes to see you. I'm telling you, God is at work all around you. Every single moment of every single day, God is at work around you. He's at work in your life in ways that sometimes are big and glorious and highly visible, but most of the time, he's at work in your life in ways that are small and quiet and still. But make no mistake, God is always at work, even when you can't see how.